Tim, thanks so much for being on the show today. I want to start with this. What is one of the hardest parts about being in sports media and or sports radio specifically?
Hardest parts? Well, I mean, it's funny. We were just talking off air. You said you like to dive right in. This is jumping in. I publicly, right, this podcast, I know you have the listenership and you have all the distribution. I don't like to complain about my job publicly because – as one of the things I say is like it's definitely not roofing in July. Like I talk about sports for a living, so I've stumbled into somehow they pay me to do what I would be doing if I wasn't getting paid. The hardest part is it's a super competitive industry, right? As you can probably guess, a lot of people want to do it, so there's always that kind of competition level. If you get by that, it's if you want to be real stickler, especially in our market, I guess July would be the toughest because we're not a huge baseball market, so you're scraping the bottom of the barrel for topics. But I mean, it's a pretty cool job. I'm like I said, I'm not going to jump into too many deep dark complaints.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm curious. You probably hear a lot of that. Must be nice. That's cool. Whatever. What are maybe some of the biggest misconceptions about what you do?
Thank you for allowing me to clear this up. The biggest, like, oh, that must be nice, that must be cool is one part. The other part I hear a lot, and this is no disrespect to the people that tell me, but it's just like, oh, you're from outside the industry. Or like, me and my buddies are so funny talking about sports. Like, we should be on your station. And I'm going like, that's part of it. Passion, love, like being, making your buddies laugh. There is I don't want to say a science, but there is something real there where, you need to craft an opinion, you need to back it up with facts, you need to be able to tell it in an entertaining way. So I guess if there's a misconception that I hear a lot, it's kind of the idea that what we do on air is the same thing that is in your group chat with your buddies, right? We're recording this right after the Ravens-Chiefs game. Like a funny joke about that toe being on the line with your friends is 20 to 30 seconds of a radio show. When I do 3.5 hours every single day on air, you're going to need a lot more than that. So I take pride in the prep. I take pride in making sure that when I go on, if absolutely nothing happens, if we get no callers, if my producer doesn't mention anything, like if it is the most dead day, I can fill 3 hours pretty much off of just, what I've prepared. So, it's not you and your buddies talking at the bar.
Well, speaking of preparing, I mean, especially doing a daily show, how much is it preparing day of versus like, oh, we've thought these topics, like we've already planned the week out. How do you know what you're going to talk about each day?
That's another great question for like aspiring radio hosts. They work hand in hand. So when it comes to like planning out the entire week, kind of what the through lines are, what the big narratives are. In our market, you're going to be talking NC State, UNC, Duke every week in some way. You're going to be talking Panthers during football season every week in some way. And we have built-in features, right? Like, hey, every day on this time we're going to do our top fives, or every week this time we're like whatever the features are. But I also like emphasize you can waste a lot of time if like you think, oh, I'm going to get ahead on tomorrow's show and plan it all today, because then, Seth Jarvis signs a new contract and all of a sudden everything you were going to talk about yesterday is stale. And to be a current show, and part of the good part about radio is we're not scripted. We are live. So if I'm on air and news breaks, we have full autonomy to go scrap everything we prepped for the next hour. We're talking about this thing. So you can waste a lot of time prepping too far in advance because then you end up just re-prepping the show once something else happens. So I have an idea of what the show is. We have, at other places it's been Slack. We have a Teams channel. Well, me, my producer, program director, our fill-in producer, and we're constantly, if you see a tweet that you think, oh, we could talk about this, you just throw it in the chat. Or, oh, here's an article that's interesting, throw it in the chat. That way, day of, you can go through there and, okay, here's what we thought was interesting, how much makes it into the show.
Yeah. So in real time, we're recording this beginning of September, obviously local to the Raleigh area, Seth Jarvis, Carolina Hurricanes. What happens when there's like something breaking news in the morning? How do you decide, we got a 3-hour show, how much time we're going to dedicate talking about this? And how do you ensure you have enough to talk about for a lot of time?
If there's breaking news, I like to joke that we turn into like a hospital when, the ambulance comes in and they're yelling code blue, and all of a sudden, sorry if you have a broken arm, you're going to sit in this waiting room for a little bit. We all got to drop that and go deal with this life-threatening thing over here. Obviously, that's putting way too much importance on what we do. But, sorry if you're recording a podcast about the offseason for the Carolina Hurricanes, Frank Reich just got fired, or Derek Brown just signed a new deal with the Panthers, or Mac Brown said something crazy. We all mobilize, right? Right now, if we're on air, it's awesome. If we're on air, it's just fire the breaking news sounder. First thing that comes into your head, you talk about. Those are kind of the days we live for. If you're off air, it becomes, how can we monetize this socially? Let's get on social networks. Let's record videos. Is it big enough news that we take over whatever's on air and just go sit in the studio and go? When it comes to deciding how much to talk about it, it's more of a gut feel, and it's how much do you want to talk about it? Like, and maybe that is, I just said it's nothing like talking with your buddies. That's kind of where you can use that test. If me and my buddies got together at a bar for an hour, what percentage of it, when we're talking sports, after we catch up on, kids and families, are we talking about this piece of news? If it's the whole time, I don't mind doing a whole show on one topic, especially because, and I'm sure with your branding with the 1 minute deal, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
So our audience is turning over faster and faster and faster. If we keep you for 15 minutes, that's a win. When back in the day, right, you had one radio station and you just left it there, and every time you were in your car, you were listening to that station. So, I don't have a problem almost having never the exact same, but a similar conversation every half hour, because the chances of a completely new audience listening is important. And as awesome as my point was at 3:15, if you didn't tune in until 3:30, you didn't get to hear it. So it's you got to play the hits a little bit.
When you're like planning out maybe like specific segments, how much of it is written? Is it all kind of, hey, Bryce Young, let's say Carolina Panthers quarterback, I'm just going to talk about this specific thing for 15 minutes. Do you have like bullet points? You just like kind of riff? Like, how do you prepare like a specific segment?
This is something I struggled with early in my career, and I've been lucky to have some mentors and some consultants and things that have helped me. And one of them, early in my career, I was hosting my first daily show, and I fell into the over-preparing kind of group. So I was basically like scripting 2 hours a day. I was like, because they were bullet points, but each bullet point was like 4 sentences long, and you could hear it. So one of the people that were working with me to get better called up my boss and said his show starts at whatever it was, 4 o'clock. I think it was 4 to 6. At 4:15, walk in there and take away all of his notes. And so he took away all my notes. He gave me a sticky note that just had the topic, I was in upstate New York at the time, so it said like Yankees lost 6-3. The next one was, Syracuse basketball, new recruit. And that's all I had for the next hour and 45 minutes. Wow. I wouldn't suggest doing that every day, but it showed me like, oh, the topics, like you've done the research, you can kind of ad lib a little bit. So now I'm a bullet point guy. In front of me, if I need a stat, like if I'm referencing, someone's free throw percentage from 2 years ago, I write that down because, I don't want to say 76 when it's 67 or whatever, and then I'm just wrong. So I write down stats. I write down bullet points. My producer knows when I'm too far off, and he can bring me back with a quick question or whatever. But no, it's less scripted than it has been, but I would say more prepped than it has been because, you do all of that beforehand, and then it's the 8th grade speech contest, right? You get the index card, and your teacher's saying, don't read it like this. You want to, for those of you just listening to this, don't stare at your index card the whole time.
Right.
Just have a word down there. So if you get off track, you look down and you're like, oh, right. Okay. That's what I wanted to say. Now I can keep going on that.
So speaking of notes in front of you, I know this has changed a lot too in your industry because now it's even local radio. You got YouTube, like it's streamed. Like even I see a lot of guys like you yourself. You talk about these note cards or these notes, but what we see like on YouTube, for example, I don't see anything in front of you. So is it like off screen? Is it on a TV screen somewhere else or?
I usually have a computer somewhere nearby.
Okay.
But the YouTube stuff is completely new because we have screens up in our studio and our live stream is on one of those screens. So, just like this, we're doing this remotely, or when you're on FaceTime, you get caught like watching yourself. And right, when you're FaceTiming, you're staring at the little square in the circle or in the bottom rather than the person you're talking to. Right. So it's taken me a while to get used to, not letting my eyes drift up and why is my shirt like that? Oh no, why why are they cutting my head off at the top? And it's like that. We focus on radio, so the visual is nice, but it's not the priority. So, I usually have a computer in front of me with notes there that I can scroll through.
That's cool. Now, we talked about this a little bit. I think specifically guys grow up, especially if they're in the sports world. We all at some point want to be a commentator, talk show host, Sports Center, ESPN. I had a phase in high school when I wanted to be like a college basketball commentator. But of course, like it's one thing to say that would be cool. It's quite another thing to actually like pursue it and put in the work, the unglamorous late nights, traveling, whatever. When did you know or decide that you wanted to be in sports media?
Great point. All right, and it is one of those things that, like I said, everybody's like it could be fun. I decided I wanted to do the sports thing halfway through college. So I played football at the University of Delaware, and I was going to go make a ton of money. So I enrolled in the business school. I was going to double major in finance and marketing, and I took all these stat classes and accounting classes. And when I tell you I hated it, it is an understatement. And I had probably what a lot of kids have in college, that moment where you're like, am I going to do this for the rest of my life? Like, am I going to sit in a cubicle looking at spreadsheets for the rest of my life? Or at least, for the next 50 years. And then on an off chance, a buddy needed a ride. He was in the communications school and was going to audition for the or not audition. He was going to go shadow for like the school television show. And he was a wide receiver. I was a quarterback on the football team. And we showed up and 2 of their interviews had canceled. So they were like, we're just here to watch. But they went, do you mind if we interview you about the football season this year? And I was a backup quarterback at the time. He was a like special team wide receiver, but we jumped on and we just had a good time with it. We saw that they were a good vibe, and I went, wait a second, this could be something that keeps my attention more than this stuff I'm doing in class. I'm someone who, and this is just like with age and time in the business, I've become aware. If I'm interested in it, like I can grind. I can go 17 hours a day. I can, talk about sports all day, go home, watch a game, and then immediately, if my wife and son are asleep, start rewatching that game and taking notes. If I'm not interested in it, you're going to find me cutting corners and shortcuts and stuff. So I pretty much learned I was going to be in sports. It came down to coaching or media. Once the NFL made it clear that I wasn't going to be invited. It came down to coaching or media, and I had some interesting interactions with coaches throughout my career. So I was like, I don't want to be that person for someone else, and I jumped into media, where it's been going now for I don't know 10, 12 years.
Yeah. So I want to talk about kind of your journey in media. Before I do want to hit on this football thing. You went to Delaware as a preferred walk-on.
Yep.
Ended up as a scholarship, which I feel like that probably happens. But then you're also a starter, which I feel like is probably pretty rare for a preferred walk-on at a quarterback position to then become the starter at the quarterback position by the time it's over. Does that typically happen? And for you, how did that happen?
Well, I was the first one in Delaware history to start as a walk-on and become the starter for a season. So, like, it is rare, and it's one of the when I look back on my career, it's one of the things I'm most proud of, because it is right coming out of high school. No one believed in you, and then you proved. Yeah. And I got to luckily play pretty well and beat a lot of the coaches who, coming out of high school, were like, yeah, no, and I that was it's fun, and I'm not trying to brag. It's just one of those things I'm proud of. How does it happen is the definition of fake it till you make it. The story, and every year on signing day, right? Because National Signing Day in college sports It's this big thing, and it is getting bigger, right? You get the people with scholarships put the 6 hats in front of them,
Right.
and they pick up the Georgia hat. Oh no, I'm going to Tennessee. Oh no, and then eventually they unzip the hoodie, and underneath it says, North Carolina, and it's a whole thing, and it's covered on ESPN, and every year on signing day. I don't know who's listening to the show. I don't know if any of the high school prospects listen to the show, but my thing is. What's way more important than the applause on signing day is the applause on senior day, right? Signing day is just the beginning. Senior day is you've earned those. So I kind of showed up at Delaware. I had a family friend on the team who kind of gave me like the look back and said like, no, we give walk-ons a chance here. I had a few other preferred walk-on offers, and it was like, without that insider knowledge, I didn't know. Coaches may treat you like a tackling dummy. So he said, like, we give walk-ons a chance here. Matter of fact, there was a few games I served as a captain my senior year, and it was a linebacker, a running back, and me, and we were all former walk-ons. So shout out to Delaware for that opportunity. But basically, I showed up and just pretended I wasn't. Like, if the scholarship guys were there all summer, I found a way to be there all summer. If they were there for 5 a.m. workouts, I found – and if they got this meal plan for free, I went and tried to buy the exact meal plan. So there was never a time where they were going to the dining hall and I was outside going, oh, man, I got to go to the other dining hall. Yeah. I just wanted to – I didn't want the players to know. There are times where they do. Another story I tell about this is there are certain preseason training camp meetings as a team where then they discuss – like where you pick up your books for free or whatever the scholarship things are. And coach would just say at the end of a meeting, hey, scholarship guys, stick around. Everybody else, you can go, which sounds so basic. But our team meeting room was like a movie theater. So if you're in the middle, you have to then stand up and do like the, excuse me, pardon me, like coming through. And every scholarship guy's just sitting there hanging out, watching you leave, and it's like little scarlet letter action. So when that happens, I mean, it was motivating for me, but it's slightly embarrassing. Even though the scholarship guys love the walk-ons and treat you normal and respect everything you're doing, it's still like, hey, everyone who wasn't good enough in high school, stand up and get out of here. And it's like, God, all right. So it was a little bit of faking it till I make it, and a little bit of, I like to think I do have some ability, and the hard work paid off, and I could sling the rock a little bit, but the journey from walk on to scholarship is not easy, and it's one of the things I'm more proud of, and obviously to starter.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. Now, we also have Josh Cox. He's the director of the NIL for the Durham Devils Club.
Okay.
So he works with a lot of the football team.
For sure.
So we've got him on the show. We had a whole episode about the NIL for those in college athletics, how it works. I'm specifically curious, as someone who actually played, in division, played college football. Do you feel some sort of way about NIL being a thing now when it wasn't when you were there?
Yeah, obviously. The rule changes are so pro player, and that's not just NIL. That's the new transfer rules. It's the new red shirt rules, the eligibility rules. There's a good chance I probably would have transferred at some point in my college career, just because, I ended up playing for like a year and a half, but there were times where I felt like I was better than the guy that was playing, and at certain points I was paying for my education, so it would have been like, I have no loyalty to you. Like, see ya. Or the other thing that really upsets me is my freshman year, true freshman walk-on, I played 12 plays. That cost me a full year of eligibility. Okay. Nowadays, you can play 4 complete games, and still retain that year of eligibility. So I would have loved to have another year on campus, which nowadays I would have. The NIL stuff, I don't know if, like I say this on air a bunch, but my cousin is Mike Glennon, who played at NC State and was a 10-year NFL veteran quarterback. I think those guys, he's got a real beef because the money would have been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, for him, and also the taking care of your offensive line and all those sorts of things. Delaware obviously isn't an ACC school, but I think I easily could have had some partnership with a restaurant on Main Street to get, me and my offensive lineman Thursday dinners, and I'll in exchange for a couple tweets. I think I could have done some things for some charity causes, and then maybe put a little bit of money in my pocket, which would have been very well appreciated at that point in time. So the deals, everything, like, I'm not somebody, I get very frustrated when old athletes are like, I didn't have it, so they shouldn't have it. They're soft. I'm going like, no, athletes, you can't really have an off-campus job, and you're working just as hard as everybody that's, bussing tables. So why can't we make some money? And obviously some guys, it's going to get outlandish and it's going to be in the millions, but they probably deserve it. They're filling stadiums every weekend.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, again, sports media, how you got there, the grind. I think a lot of people just assume I could do that one day. But I am curious. I know we hinted on this. Does it bother you when people talk about how, I could do that? Like, everyone thinks I can talk about. I mean, what do you think, or how do you feel when people say that? Because I'm sure they even say it to you sometimes, maybe in jest, but probably somewhat serious, that they could do what you could do.
This is where, I have to be self-aware, because here's the crazy part. Some people are right. Some people, they can walk into this show and crush it. And those people, right? They're the wildly magnetic, great storytellers. If you played in the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball, and your stories are, so I was in the locker room with Larry Fitzgerald, or so Tom Brady used to tell me, that's going to go a long way. But for the most part, I think there's some natural talent you need. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and most importantly, like, it's a 10,000 hours thing. I started my career fresh out of Delaware. I was doing like high school game of the week. I was a sideline reporter for Delaware games, and I just wasn't on air enough. I felt like I wasn't getting better at a rate that was there. So I applied to every small market sports radio station in the country for probably 7, 8, 9 months, and just got no, and eventually Broken Bow, Nebraska, KBBN, KCNI, which the town, and this is how I describe it, the entire town's population was less than my first high school. So there was like 3,500 people in the town of Broken Bow. And I moved out there, knew nobody, showed up. My boss, when I was like accepting the job, he said, I don't really do contracts. I just do handshakes. And I was like, I'm moving from, at the time I was living in Baltimore, I was like, I'm moving from Baltimore to Nebraska, like on a handshake. And he was like, yep, I trust you to show up if you trust me to be here. And I was like, deal. So I moved out to Nebraska. I was there for like 3 years. But the beauty of it was they paid me by the play-by-play game, and they let me set the schedule. So I was 3 volleyball games on Tuesday, 3 volleyball games on Thursday, football on Friday. There was usually like a rodeo or something on a Monday or a Wednesday. I was doing cross country on the weekend because I didn't know anybody there. I had nothing to do, and they let me set the schedule and paid me by the game. So, and they weren't paying me much otherwise. I hosted a community-based morning show from 6 to 9:30 in the morning, co-hosted it, which we literally interviewed like the guy that managed the grocery store. And he would come in and say, canned corn is down to $1.25 this week. Yeah. We have a special on rotisserie chickens, and I would crack a joke about a rotisserie chicken as best I could. And then he would go into like the next coupon. Then this is my favorite. Then I did a on-air marketplace, which is a old school radio thing where you can call in and say like, hey, I've got a dozen farm fresh eggs. I'm looking for a bike tire. If you want to trade, here's my phone number. Or you can call in and say, I got a used bicycle. My kid just went to college. I'm selling his bike. I'm looking for, whatever, a blender. And if you can make that trade happen. And then I did 4 hours of country radio in the afternoon. Then I recorded 4 hours of rock radio. And that allowed me to get out of the office because I recorded the rock radio. I could then get out of the office to go do play-by-play, which sounds like a lot, sounds very boring, and at times it was, but I saw it as like 16 hours on air a day. And if I'm trying to get to my 10,000 hours, the Gladwellian 10,000 hours, that's as fast as I could do it. And then after 3 years there, I thought I was pretty good at this thing, but I would cry if you made me read or listen to the tapes of my first days in Nebraska.
Yeah. No, I can relate, not specifically to sports radio, but as a pastor who preaches often, man, if I had to go back, oof. Now,
And I'm sure you do. I'm sure you record and you watch back and you try to watch the tape. And I do that. Like I will listen to my recent stuff, but I don't go too far back. That's
we delete those.
Yeah.
That stuff. So yeah, this is fascinating. I think it's interesting for people to hear just really how competitive it is and how much work you have to get to even to where you are today. So I'd love like an overview. So you spent 3.5 years in Nebraska, then what?
3.5 years in Nebraska. Then I went to ESPN Ithaca in upstate New York, which
and how did you do that? How did you get that job from there?
There's a few sites, few industry like or job boards.
Okay.
Funny story about getting the Ithaca job. And tell me if these stories go too long. So leaving Broken Bow, leaving Nebraska, I started looking for jobs probably like 9 months in because, just wanted to keep moving. Everybody there was super nice. Loved the people I worked with, but it was far from home. It was a small market, on and on.
Right.
To the point where I was pulling like weird motivational tactics on myself. I took my bed off the bed frame and put it on the floor as like I'm already packing up. I'm already getting the job. I'm on my way out, even though I did not even have an interview. So anyway, the Ithaca job, I thought it was a really good next step for me. My sister-in-law, who at the time was just my girlfriend's sister, had gone to the University of Ithaca, and they liked the area. She was like, it's a decent sports town. I did not get the job. They like the listing went from open to like closed, and we've contacted candidates for next interviews. And this is 3.5 years into Nebraska, 2.5 years into looking for jobs and being turned down a bunch. And I just called, left a message more aggressive than I'd been with anybody in the job searching world, just saying like, you've missed out on an opportunity. I'm perfect for this job. I would have killed it. Nobody would work harder. And like 20 minutes later, I got a call from the boss saying like, I didn't realize you were so passionate about, Ithaca. And let's go with the next interview. And that got me there. After a year and a half, that job was brutal just because of the bunch of different hats I had to wear. I had to be on call all night, which wasn't fun. I went to Blacksburg, Virginia, which is we were on the flagship for the Virginia Tech Hokies, which was a big deal where I got to talk about like sports that I would have watched even if I wasn't paid to watch them. From there, I went to Virginia Beach as a producer, worked my way into being a host and producer just because the market was bigger and it was time to get to a market with ratings and so I could start seeing scoreboards and stuff. And then from there, the job here in Raleigh opened up. I've had connections to the area forever, love the area, and kind of jumped at it when the opportunity opened up, and luckily it worked out.
I'm curious, probably a lot of people in sports media, as they kind of climb the ranks, do what you did. Like, they're going all over the place. Is it Delaware, Nebraska, New York, Virginia here? How hard is it to cover a team if you're not like a fan of it, or do you become a fan of it? I mean, even again, I'm in Raleigh as well, not on the fan. Hearing some of your stuff, like it seems like you're maybe I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. A fan of the Panthers. You like college football around here. Is that like, how do you do that? Going to these teams that you probably didn't care about before, and now you're in their market.
Well, the interesting part about like me bouncing around a little bit is I was born in Florida. Went to the first part of elementary school in New Jersey, went to middle school and the first part of high school in Hawaii, went to the last 2 years of high school in Maryland, then Delaware, then Baltimore, then Nebraska, so I'm a bit of a nomad in that way. So I'm kind of used to it, but I actually think it's the reverse that happens. You almost lose your fandom because you don't want to be like,
yeah.
Like, I grew up a Broncos fan for no other reason than when I was 9 years old, they were good. And I just liked John Elway and Terrell Davis and that crew.
Yeah.
But I can't really be a Broncos fan now. Like, I root for the Panthers. I want them to be good. My job is more fun when they're good. I root for the Panthers. College is a little bit more difficult because, you can't root for one. You got to root for all three. I just want interesting. I want fun. And it allows my points to hopefully be more objective. So it's almost like, kind of the opposite. You don't become a fan of wherever you are. You're not a fan of any. You are like a professional observer of them all. And then I'm also like, as millennial as they come, I like if you want my fandom, it's to my fantasy team. Like it's the cheesiest, worst way to watch sports, but I'm obsessed with that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I know we're this beginning of September. This episode probably come out about a month or so. Any Panthers players on your fantasy team this year?
Well, I'm in one league that I was invited to by a fan, and I just can't say no to fantasy leagues. One league, and the whole point is there's a couple other journalists that cover the Panthers and a couple of really, really big fans. We have to start a Panther. Every week you have to start a Panther.
Oh, man.
So I've traded way too much to get the Panthers kicker because I figure can't do too much damage there. So I have Eddie Pinheiro. In other leagues, though, I think Jatavian Sanders, their young tight end, is going to be good. And I'm in some dynasty leagues where you need to get rookies and stuff, and you own them forever. So I have some Jatavian Sanders. I think Deontay Johnson's going to have a big year, just based on volume. They're going to throw it to him a whole bunch of times. So they've got some guys. I wouldn't draft them in the first round, but to put it lightly. But yeah, they've got some guys moving and shaking.
So you've been in the industry about a decade. Obviously, things change a lot. Social media, technology. If you were coming out of Delaware now, what would you do different? How would you kind of get your name out there? And
this is super common question, right? Interns and stuff are always coming up and saying what do I need to do? How do I get in your chair? To me, it's never been easier to get the reps. I had to go to Nebraska to be on air for that many hours. You can start a YouTube channel. You can start a podcast. You can write a blog. You can make a all-encompassing site where you have podcasts and blogs and podcasts and fan comments and, I don't know, memes, whatever you do. So that my advice always is just what do you want to do? And then they say, well, I want to be a host. I want to host a daily show. And I'm going do it. You're not going to get paid for it now.
Right.
But do it and be consistent about it. If you do it 3 times a week and you're going on vacation, record 3 ahead of time so you can post them even when you're on vacation. Or if your buddy's coming to town, don't go I haven't seen him for a while, I'll skip this Wednesday show. No, treat it like a job. And then when you get the opportunity, or if you're an intern here and we're at just for the NC State football home opener, we did our show live from outside the stadium. We were outside Carter Finley, and we had fans walking by and all that stuff. It was also the hottest day for that day of the calendar year since at least 1948. We actually had a WRAL meteorologist on the show, and she was like, no, I'm worried about fans. Drink water, find shade. We hit 100, and it was way too late in the year to hit 100. And some of our equipment overheated. And one of our assistant producers here had to fill 20 minutes while we figured out how to cool down our equipment out on the remote. And his name's Graham Hill. He's great, hardworking young kid, William Peace graduate, and he played some recorded stuff. He had to jump on the mic, and it's you're only ready for that if you've done 1,000 hours when no one was listening. Yeah. So my with everything going on YouTube, start a Substack, start a Patreon. I don't even really know what that is. Start a Twitter account, start a YouTube, start a TikTok, start it and start creating content. And then, when the other opportunities are there, you'll be more prepared for it. It's no different than scrimmaging in football. It'd be ridiculous to go into a game if you never ran a 3rd down and 7 in practice, or whatever the situation is. So practice, I guess.
Yeah. Now, curious, you've been done a lot of radio over the years, probably done a lot of call-ins. What's the most that you can think of awkward call-in live that you've dealt with?
Awkward call? I don't know what it is, and it doesn't happen much anymore. I'm 33 years old, but when I was 31, I got a decent amount of opportunities on a national radio station, and it was super fun. And I could take call-ins. It was where, if you talk about the Houston Texans, you're getting callers from Houston. If you talk about the UCLA, you're getting callers from LA. But people used to just call in and hammer me for just saying, for you can't possibly know that, you're too young. And it really frustrated me because, as I told, I prep. I'm not talking about something that I didn't double check. And I know all the websites with the stats that go back to the 1800s. So then it became, I don't think the best radio, which is always what I'm going for. It became me just trying to prove myself. Guy would call in and say, like, you can't possibly say that about Troy Aikman. He played in the 90s and you were 4 years old. And it became me just rattling off like trivia about Troy Aikman. It was a really weird one for me to deal with. I've gotten better at it, and obviously now I'm in, about to be in my mid-30s, so it's like maybe I've crossed over whatever age threshold these callers had for me. But that was always a funny one when I would just make like a mundane point and someone would call in and be like, "Oh goodness, this Gen Z." I'm like, that's not even me. So it's and sports radio is that way. Or sports in general is that way. Like, you go listen to any Hall of Famer from the 90s, they think every player now is soft. And it was no different than that. It was dealing with, you must have grown up watching LeBron. And I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? As far as like just interesting, funny calls, and I don't encourage this and I don't want this to happen. I had a buddy call in. I was on 106.7 in Washington, D.C., and I had a buddy who lived in the area called in and pretended to be another one of our buddies. So if his name was Joe, he called in and said he was Jim from Raleigh, because I had a buddy who was Jim from Raleigh. And he just made it like he was saying a bunch of ridiculous things. And it took me like 2 or 3 minutes to figure out what was going on and recognize the voice and place it to, okay, I see what's going on here. And then I was able to jump in. But I'll never forget the producer looking at me with eyes going like, do I drop him? Do I cut him off? Like, what do I do here? And I was like, I need to figure out what's going on. So that happens. One more, and this is not a call-in, but it is a story I tell. Early in Nebraska, actually, I was doing they call them a triangular, 3 volleyball games in one night. And I was in my 3rd volleyball game. And to be completely fair, these are schools that have 20 kids a grade. 3rd volleyball game starting at 9:30 at night. Probably not a lot of people listening. And my buddies, like 7 or 8 of them were like, "Oh my gosh, we're listening to you do this volleyball game," because they could listen online. And I was like, awesome, fantastic. And then what they ended up doing, because they were all hanging out together. So like, say it's a Friday night, they're hanging out, probably having a few sodas, and listening to me call volleyball across the country. They sent me a text. There were 7 of them. Sent me a text with 7 random words. So fire hydrant, koala bear, shamalama ding dong, like whatever it is. And so each of them had picked one. And they were then sitting there playing the game on which words I could say in the broadcast first. And then like whoever I said first would be the winner or whatever they were competing for. So it's like, the improv, the callers, that kind of stuff, it's fun where you can kind of work different things in. And, when somebody calls you young, you got to defend it. When somebody says you got to say fire hydrant, you got to find a way to work fire hydrant into the volleyball broadcast.
Yeah, that's great. Now, speaking of volleyball broadcast, I mean, what you do now, you get to cover professional college sports, stuff that you would watch, even if you weren't getting paid. Obviously, that wasn't always the case. How do you find like the energy, the excitement to cover things that you really don't care about at all?
Well put. I think you just think back to when you were playing high school sports. I remember how cool it was when like your name was in the paper for the first few times. Or I remember like I did a post-game interview after a big game in high school on a radio station. And I walked into the locker room and all my buddies were like, "Oh, big timer, Hollywood over here." And it's like, or how cool it is for a grandparent that maybe can't travel to an away game to be able to keep like 100% up on what their grandkid is doing. So care about it, right? Like if you're doing it, you might as well do it well. So and like I said, like I grew up in Hawaii. My grandparents were in Maryland at the time. It would have been so cool if they could tune into like a YouTube live stream or a internet stream and listen to my brothers or my cousins, whatever, high school games. So yeah, I do it because I think it's important. You'll never find somebody that's more of an advocate for youth sports than me. I think they're important. So covering them is just a part of the like a spoke in the wheel.
Yeah. So you're you primarily host The Drive with Tim Donnelly, 999 The Fan in Raleigh, the Raleigh market. Obviously, you do extra stuff as well. But what is, I mean, depends on the sports season, what's going on. What does like a typical work day hours-wise look like? I mean, I guess you have to, maybe you start the night before with the games you're watching, but what does that look like for you?
First of all, if you ask my wife, right, it's like Monday Night Football's on, I got to work tonight, right? It's, the kid needs a bath. Well, sorry, I got to work. The Thursday Night Football game's on. So that's work, kind of. It's not really. The work, I get in 9 o'clock in the morning. First thing I do is go to that list I talked about of all the topics. If there's enough there, it's smooth sailing, right? If you have enough topics already picked, it's about coming up with your opinions. It's about, figuring out what stories you want to tell. Not planning everything, but kind of having a roadmap. It's the days where you show up and you go to that list of like things we've found interesting in the last 24 hours, and there's 3 things, and one of them you look at and you're like, that's not even interesting. Then you have to start, diving in. You can go watch stuff on, rewatch a game, reread an article, check out a press conference, something, and you got to find, that's a nugget that I disagree with that this coach said. Now we got 12 minutes there, and we can, support it. So the work, and we're a company here that has music stations in the building. There's multiple sports radio shows. There's high school OT, which covers all the high school. Like, part of it is you got to go to meetings and do the corporate thing and brainstorm ideas and talk with sales and make sure your sales manager and your VP and your PD are all pleased with what you're doing. So there's that stuff as well. But most of the time it's just, I'm lucky. I get to read sports articles and figure out what I think is interesting to talk about.
So of all those really cool things you get to do, if you had to pick like one thing, one favorite thing about what you get to do, what would you say?
That's a fantastic question. One thing, well, I'll start with a little process of elimination. The thing that most people are like most jealous of us is we pretty much get to go to like any game we want, right? You apply for a media credential, especially if it's in the state of North Carolina. 99.9 The Fan is a brand that is going to get us in the door. I actually don't like going to games as a media member. You got to sit in the media box. You got to be quiet. You can't cheer. You're there to, pick up on body language of somebody who they like wouldn't be showing on TV, or you can go down on the field pregame. But I'm somebody like I like to watch and take notes, and I like to jump out of my seat when something's going crazy. I don't really get off on like did you see the game? I was there. It does nothing for me. So that I'll cross that off. I really like interviewing interesting people. I like newsmakers when I can kind of, dive into their brains a little bit. Love interviewing players and coaches. I think it's part of it is just like sharing. Like I said, I think sports are important, and I like to relate them to what everybody has going on. One of the things that I've been complimented on a few times, and I always take it as like a heck yes, that's what I'm going for, is taking something that is maybe high level football or basketball and telling it in a way that somebody who's never played the sport could understand. So I that's probably like the thing that is a weird specific compliment that if I get, I go, yes, that's what I'm looking for. That's, that gives me the biggest endorphin rush.
Yeah. Speaking of interviews, is there one or two of your favorites you've ever done that you just like look back on like that was awesome?
I'll give you a few, 2 or 3. Just this week, I interviewed Turtle from Entourage. I don't know if you've ever seen that show. He's starting a podcast with Matt Leinart, and it's a weird like moment in my like nostalgia where it was cool to interview him. And he's a super nice guy, down to earth, was willing to tell stories, like definitely appeased my like, sorry, I'm just gonna like ask questions that I'm interested in. There's, as far as like big interviews, Rich Gannon was a cool one for me. So a few years I got to cover the Super Bowl at the Super Bowl. And Super Bowl Radio Row has celebrities walking around, has legends walking around. So you just kind of grab them, and if they have scheduled time, you talk to them. And so Rich Gannon played at Delaware, then went on to be an NFL MVP. And when I was in college playing football at Delaware, the section of the locker room where the quarterback sat had a big mural of Rich Gannon. And so then 10 years later after that, we were both at the Super Bowl working as media, and I got him onto the show. And it was like, I told him, I was like, dude, I stared at your picture for 4 years. Like what's going on? And he loosened up and we had a good time. I posted a picture and I said, between the two of us, we have like 40,000 NFL passing yards, an NFL MVP, 4 Pro Bowls, and 8 years at the University of Delaware. To which my mom was like, "Do you realize how many people have reached out to me and asked why I never told them you played in the NFL?" I was like, "Tell them to read the tweet. It's funnier than that." But Rich is, I mean, that's like, meaningful and cool because he's an NFL MVP too.
That's great. Well, speaking of playing in the NFL, and maybe how you would answer this is different now than what you were in Delaware, but if you could choose between being an NFL starting quarterback or hosting something like ESPN First Take, for those that don't know the sports world, it's like one of the biggest rated sports shows today. Which one would you choose if you had your own media show that big, or an NFL starting quarterback?
You're never going to get me to choose anything other than NFL starting quarterback. It's, a 9-year-old me would get a time machine and slap me in the face if I picked talking about other people playing. And part of the reason that I like what I do now is there's a scoreboard. Like, there are ratings, right? Like, we know who's winning in the time slot. I am an extremely competitive person. There are people in my family I am not allowed to be on the other team of when we get together and play board games because it doesn't end well. Like, I'm a wildly competitive person. So being in the NFL is and like I said, my cousin played 10 years in the NFL. So I know a little bit about what that life is like, and the NFL, obviously, they retire everybody at some point in time. They just, retired me before I got there.
Nice. Now, we said before we jumped on here, you've been in Raleigh for about a year now. Not on the Fan, doing a great job there. I'm curious, too. Let me ask before I ask this question. I think when I was telling you before this interview, when I was a senior in high school was when 99 The Fan came out. I looked this up to double check, and I was like, yeah, I remember listening because I've been a sports guy. I would read the sports page. That's all I would do every morning before I'd go to school. I was never competitive enough to be good at anything. For me, middle school soccer was the best team I ever made. But it's been growing a lot. I know they started a YouTube channel maybe a little while ago. I've seen that grow. What's it like being there? What's the plans for 99 The Fan? What are you guys hoping for in the future?
We actually just had a staff meeting. What was it, yesterday? Where our social media manager, we're putting out new guidelines on this is what we're going to use Twitter for, this is what we're going to use Instagram for. We're going to copy this and put it on Threads and da-da-da. And the joke was, well, we kind of need to have this meeting every month because the landscape in college sport or in sports media is changing so rapidly that, to keep up, we have to do a good job with it. YouTube, as you mentioned, since I've gotten here, I want to say we picked up somewhere near 10,000 followers, which is more than 2 or 3x what we had. So that's blowing up for us. The live streams, the highlight packages, the segments and shorts. So the plan is, for right now, our number one focus is always going to be over-the-air radio, but it's all about repackaging that content. And, radio used to be kind of the wild, wild west. You said it, they either heard it or they missed it. Did he really say that? Was like a legitimate question. It wasn't. Now, if you were listening on a stream, did he really say that? I don't know. Boop, 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 boop. Let's play it again. So we're using, you have a great segment. It's not just a great segment anymore. Now, boom, let's get that on YouTube as quick as we can. And let's clip that first 2 minutes and put it on Instagram. And let's use it and, use a different background or put the little head in the corner where you're talking about it on TikTok. So we're trying to be as fluid and as flexible and as adaptive as we possibly can, while still, making sure the main thing's the main thing, and we're talking about the right teams and having the right conversations.
I'm curious too. Speaking of like the main thing. Maybe this is easier for those that like have the big national brands because they probably have more help. Maybe have to sit through less meetings. And this is kind of maybe inside baseball for those who are in the sports world. But if you think of someone like Stephen A. Smith or Shannon Sharp or Colin Cowherd, these guys like you have their shows, but they also have like their extra shows.
Mm-hmm.
And like, A, don't they get tired? Like, what else is there to talk about? But B, I'm like, is that 24/7? I mean, if you have your daily show, plus now you've got extra stuff on the side you're doing, like, where do you fit that all in? How do they do that?
Well, I mean, you just named three of the hardest working people in sports media. So part of it is legitimately those guys grind. But part of it is also, and I don't mean this to discredit them at all. Like, I know Colin Cowherd is a team of, 10 people that because he makes so much gosh darn money, he can afford to pay. And he shows up and it's almost like he's choosing from a menu where, do you watch The Bear at all?
I do. I was very disappointed with season 3. But
okay,
yes.
Well, spoiler alerts for anyone that watches The Bear and hasn't caught up in season 3. There's the moment where Carmi decides I am going to create a new menu every single day. Yes. And it's
so
like
stressful.
And exactly. And you can feel everyone else that he tells that go like, you're going to do all that? And as it goes along, you realize like, oh, Sydney might, come up with an idea for one, but it's always kind of Carmi is choosing it. To me, that's how a lot of those guys operate, where, one of their 9 writers will show up and say, hey, we need to talk about Lamar Jackson from last night. He's running the ball too much. And Colin can go, yeah, or he can go, actually, no. And then what do you have? And it's more of a team. And then also you get to the point with those guys where you like Stephen A. Smith's podcast, the one that's not the First Take. He's not just talking about sports, and I honestly don't think he probably preps that a ton. You can ask him, which is your favorite Air Bud movie, and he'll answer for 7 minutes. And I don't like. He's gotten to the point now where there's a large contingent of people that just want to hear Stephen A. And they know who he is, and he's kind of to that point. So it's a different kind of work, but trust me, don't get me wrong. Those guys you mentioned, like I do not want to infer that they're not driving the ship. They are exceptional workers, but it is different than when you're in a mid-market or a small market.
Yeah. Speaking of riffing 10, 15 minutes on some random topic, I would imagine that your skill in that has grown exponentially since you started out. What's that like for you? It's like, oh, you have a thought come to your head. I mean, if someone was just said, hey, I want you to talk about breaking news or whatever, we come back from commercial break, you need to talk about this for 15 minutes. You had no prep. Or you're like, no problem?
Yeah. Wasn't always that way, like you said, but I can riff pretty good. I've always been a storyteller. So when I need to fill time, I usually have some story that I can go to. Sometimes it's, hey, I heard this guy tell me this once. Like I'm not always the main character of the story. But I'll give you, speaking of, I'll give you a story. There was one time when my wife and I had just moved in together, and she went to the hair salon and walked in, right? She new area, didn't know anybody, walked in, and the lady at the hair salon said, oh, you must be the radio guy's new honey. And she looked like hadn't said a word, didn't say I'm new in town, just walked in, and that was the first thing. Now my wife is 5 foot and red hair. So apparently at some point in time I told a story about my wife, and she's tall, short, I'm tall. I don't know what the story was, but something along those lines. And I didn't even remember telling the story, but she had heard it. And to me, that was like the intro for my wife to be like, yeah, our life is kind of going to be, if I got to fill 6 minutes and the thing that pops into my head is a story about what me and you did over the weekend or what our son did, like that's going to be what's going to be said. So, it's the definition of if you always tell the truth, you don't need a good memory. Like,
there you go.
I just say things. I don't make up stories, because if you make them up, then you got to remember them. You fill time with hopefully the most entertaining thing that pops into your head. And like you did say, or like I said earlier, I am always prepped to fill an entire show if absolutely nothing happens. So I can always go back to my notes and pick it up if I ever do like really, just get stalled out.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Tim, you're again had great career, grind really hard, doing a great job here in Raleigh. If you're comfortable sharing, as you think maybe 10, 15 years down the road, man, if everything like went the way you wanted, what would you be involved in? What would you be doing?
Similar things. I think with sports media changing, there's 0% chance what I'm doing will look exactly the same. To get the real like communication school nerdy answer, I hope I'm still in content creation. To get the more specific answer, my goal has always been to host a morning show. I think for lifestyle, my son is 3.5 right now. We have so when he's to the point where like, he's playing sports after school or whatever, I would love to be able to be there for those. And right now my show goes till 6. So that's like a lifestyle thing. But other than that, going back to that 9-year-old that I said would come smack me if I picked not being an NFL quarterback, if I went back to that 9-year-old and said, I get to cover Duke UNC basketball, I get to cover the NFL, and I can call and set up an interview with the NC State football coach and he'll respond. That kid would be pretty darn happy. So. Obviously everybody want to make more money, want to, live in a nicer house. I don't know, whatever those things are. Like I'm still ambitious, but I'm also aware that what I'm doing is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Tim, thanks so much for the time and kind of peeling back the curtain behind what it's like in your industry. Really, really interesting. As we end here, if people want to connect with you online, get some of your takes, or even listen to you, where can they find you, The Drive, and where are you online?
99.9 The Fan. That is our station. 99 on your 99.9 on your dial. I'm big on this because I try to tell clients this when I'm reading the endorsements. Like I could read your phone number 10 times. I could read your website 10 times. I'll tell you exactly what everybody's going to do. They're going to try to remember your business and they're going to Google it. And then it's going to say website, it's going to say call, and they're boop, and that's what they're going to do. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, @Donnelly Sports, Tim Donnelly 99.9 The Fan. If you Google it, all of my stuff will pop up.
Yeah,
that's what you're going to do anyway. Ask your smart speaker to play 99.9 The Fan. It's just if you remember one thing from this whole conversation, it's work hard as heck, care about what you do, and 99.9 The Fan.
That's great. Great way to end. Tim, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you.